to the Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we conclude our look at the 2002 article in the Journal of Asian Martial Arts by Robert Yu. He finishes up the article by discussing the five elements, training with Hung Shang in terms of technique and usage of the five elements, and does a little comparison of the five elements to Western boxing. And he finishes up with a discussion of just the Xingyi five element theory and how that relates to the training. And in our Patreon this week, we conclude the saga of the sweet potato at Hung Shang School with a little bit of final words from Hung Shang and sort of an epilogue there of what went down afterward. So check that out. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and take care of yourselves.
Today we're going to complete our discussion of Hung Shang and Five-Fifths Xingyi Boxing in Old Taipei by Robert Yu, published in the Journal of Asian Martial Arts back in 2002. A lot of great issues of Journal of Asian Martial Arts. They're all available online from via media. You can get your PDFs there. This is volume 11, number 3 from 2002. So definitely worth checking out. So yeah, Bob's been describing training with Master Hung Shang back in Taiwan back in the 70s, and then sort of giving his breakdown of how Xingyi is constructed and how to train it. So here, let's pick up where we left off. As stated above, Xingyi's training is based on developing internal energy in movement. The postures of the five elements form follow these same ideas to gain this power. Each of the five fifths have these commonalities. One, they align the body structure. The head and neck are aligned with the spine with the hips, the legs, and the feet. Secondly, they initiate action from a different angle, requiring different muscles and tendons and ligament connections. 3, they achieve leverage through the waist, qua, action, with grounding and rooting. And the last one, they gather the internal energy and properly retain and disperse it. So those are some interesting sort of postural requirements that they remind me of the kind of things that we've seen in looking at some of the classic texts in previous podcasts, where we sort of Jin Yun Tang and others had the key points and various phrases and poems to remember. But, the body structure, yeah, all internal martial arts put that pretty much first on the list. I mean, especially Xingyi, like you advance forward and crash into somebody. If you don't have good body structure, you're going to break apart you're going to break instead of the opponent. So a structure, especially in Xingyi, maybe other martial arts are more whippy and flexible and shifty or whatever, but in Xingyi, you got to have really connected body structure so that they break apart on impact instead of you.
Xingyi comes from spear work, so the idea is that your arm is the spear, so you don't want the spear to break when it hits something, right? So the way Xingyi operates is that you have to be able to hit something and have your body move and not have your arm collapse.
We can penetrate through, kind of.
Yeah.
Then you need the different angles, requiring different muscles and tendons and ligament connections. That speaks to, you can't use brute force to sort of bash through. You got to hit on the right angle.
Well, and I think he's referring to that, like, they all use different angles, but it's all about angles, right? So they're coming at it from different positions or whatever, like up versus down, or to a diagonal versus, forward or whatever.
Right.
But you have to, whatever the technique is, it has to be on an angle so that it's not going head on into, the other person's force, right? So they each have their own way of doing
right. Like last time we were talking about from high to low, from low to high, from in to out, and each of the five fifths has a sort of different signature angle that you're going to try to find.
Mm-hmm.
And then leverage using the waist. So that's that sort of turning of the waist that we spent a whole season on Tai Chi talking about pretty much. So again, another connection there from all the internals, and then gather the internal energy, the Nei Jin or Nei Chi, and properly retain and disperse it. That's the mysterious part. That's the one that maybe sets the most martial arts will probably use most of these principles, but gathering internal energy is definitely one that's
Yeah, I
emphasized in
mean
internal martial arts.
that's the Fa Jing, or whatever, that's the term they tend to use in Tai Chi is Fa Jing, right? That you have within these techniques the ability to, expand and release energy, right? So like you compress it, you expand it, and that can knock things over, right? That it's not just about hitting the surface of stuff, that there's this other piece of it where you're using your quote internal energy to blast through people.
Sounds like good stuff. So now he gets into the idea of energy creation and energy destruction, which are these patterns of the five elements that they're taught in philosophy and weather patterns using the five elements or seasonal patterns. And there's the way one element flows into the next, but there's also the way they create and destroy each other. So water destroys or fire destroys water as being a classic one. Well, I don't
Right.
know. Wait, does water destroy fire or fire destroy water? I forget.
Depends on
It
which,
could
right? I mean,
depends on
it
how
goes
much you
both.
got.
Right. I mean, yeah, exactly.
You could boil it up or you could, water could come sloshing over and put it out. So like that's how you sort of you can arrange them in different patterns to either create or destroy. So like wood, I guess the easiest one is metal chops down wood. That's easy to picture because you use an axe to cut down a tree, right?
It's a cosmology thing, right? Like you're trying to describe how things either grow or decay, right? I mean, that's basically all things can do. Um, and you're describing, in a sense, the two different cycles, right? One is about things going from birth to sort of peak life, and then when the second stage is going from that peak life to death, right? And that something happens at that moment where you shift from being, a growing individual to a
Declining.
declining.
Well, I just turned 51, so I'd say right about 10 at least, if
Well,
not longer.
I mean, this is where I think modern medicine has extended that second
Right.
half,
And the
right? So,
Taoist masters of old figured out how to get
right,
those
that was
hormones and endocrine and
the
all these other
the
systems working.
right. The whole purpose of Neigong was to make it where when you hit that peak, rather than it, at least rather than it being a quick drop, it's a slightly slower
Slow that drop.
decline.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, extend it. That makes sense. Yeah. So,
It's a very complex interaction. So these are just giving you the big picture, sort of like sometimes it goes this way, sometimes it goes that way. So, for example, like in our system, the Xingyi follows the creative, right? That's the metal, water, wood, fire, earth,
hmm,
right? And then the Negong follows the destructive, where
interesting. So here's an interesting thing that comes up a lot in Xingyi. Master Hong Yishang said that the Earth Fist has the mechanics of the other four elements fists within it. Earth represents the unifying element, a transitional phase between the other four phases. From its center axis, it can create and destroy the other four fists. So that's the idea of the Earth fist being the mother fist, that all Xingyi schools follow that. But how they explain it is sometimes different.
yeah, I mean, I've always heard it just in terms of sort of, there's a little bit of forward, there's a little bit of up, there's a little bit of down, there's a little bit
Hmm.
of, diagonal, right? So
Because
it's
it's a
got
weird, like twisting, wrapping movement that,
right. In order to make that weird twisting movement, you have to kind of do a little bit of all of those things, right? And so and in terms of just the physicality of it, I think until you can do, for example, like a really comfortable with the footwork in Pow Chuan, you're not going to be able to really do the Hung Chuan stuff. So
hmm,
it's kind of like, there's a progression to where you need
right, because it's the most complicated footwork and the most complicated handwork. So you need all the other four to kind of come together in there. Yeah, that makes sense. And I also recall when we did Santi training with Kumar one time where he was doing this whole thing of where we were like feeling the elements while we're standing there, right? Not even on a physical level, but as a more energetic level. And it was like each of the five elements you had like for water, you would stand there and feel water dropping through your system and downward flowing and blah, blah, blah. But then when we got to Earth, he said, feel the other four feelings all at once. So you tried to like manifest all four of the up and down and out and in all at once. And that was the way to feel Earth. So that was interesting. That was sort of an extreme way to unify.
Well,
You had to split your brain into four different segments and feel all four at the same time.
right. It has, I mean, if you just take the metaphor, right, the planet Earth, right,
Mm,
contains metal,
right. Good
contains
point.
wood, it contains water, right,
Right.
and it has at its core is fire, right. So
True,
it
true.
has all of those other elements in, in or on it,
Right.
and so the idea is that it takes those other four and then combines them into a unified ball, essentially, right?
Right.
So,
So the next thing he says is that the five fists postures put the body in optimum positions to strike or neutralize an opponent from different directions. A changing position is practiced as the movement of energy responds to changing circumstances. Special attention is given to practicing movements from one posture to another posture, such as the transitions between metal fist and water fist, or between fire fist and earth fist, or between any combination of fists. And awareness of the transitions between postures trains the feet and hands to move together with the waist and produce smooth and continuous motions. This type of exercise prepares the Xingyi student for spontaneous reaction to the vicissitudes of a fight. So he's talking about the transition between each element is emphasized. I think of that as happening in the Lianhuan set more than in just
well, I
doing the
mean that,
five
yeah, I
elements.
mean that's a form that does it, but it just, I think in terms of if you're using Xingyi, right, this is the gaps that we're always talking about, right? The gaps are going to be between one technique and whatever the
Mm,
next one is, right? So it doesn't matter, it's which one you go to, but you know, if you're generally starting with a P train, right? That that's going to be where the gap is between that and the next technique. So the um, ability to keep your intent moving and your awareness solid is so that when you do one technique, there's no break either physically or mentally between that and the next. And that's kind of the whole
that's the
deal with Xingyi.
transition.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right. E, like
Without
that's what
that,
it's
it
all
doesn't.
about.
Without that, it doesn't work. I mean, the whole like mechanics of it and all that is all based upon this idea that you have the ability for your mind to not, as we say, gap out, right? That you can move without. I mean, it's in the name, right? It's like the Xing and the E got to be connected, and that's kind of that's what the training is about. But there's what actually connects them is, like he says, is this just this sort of, to borrow the more common phrase, mindfulness of what you're doing, right? You're
Hmm.
not just throwing a punch and hoping that it lands. You're, you're doing a lot of training, but you're moving, and as you move, every centimeter, millimeter, hundredth of a millimeter, you're trying to be aware of what your body's doing so that when you use it, there aren't these big giant gaps in your awareness, right? You don't blink at the end of the punch or whatever.
Right. So then he points out something that's pretty interesting. Amazingly, Xingyi's five fists and the five standard punches in American boxing, two distinct traditions from opposite ends of the world, are basically the same five punches. Metal fist is a jab, water fist is an uppercut, wood fist is a straight punch or an overhand or a cross, and fire fist is a hook. The five elements is practical, with clear parallels to Western boxing. However, an important difference is that while the five standard punches in American boxing represent tactics, the five elements of Xingyi represent training postures. So that's interesting. Like, how, I'm not, yeah, I don't quite get. He's saying that that a jab and a cross and a hook is tactics that you use, whereas the five fists represent training postures. Well, I guess the way I'm interpreting that is like the five elements are just a posture that you go through sort of ritually, but you can use them in any different direction you want. You can use your uppercut in any way you choose, but when you do the forms, they just look exactly the same every time. Is that, I don't know. What do you think
Uh,
of that?
yeah, I mean, the way to keep his language, each of the five fists has many tactics, right? So
Huh.
you can, it's not, you know, this one is just for this, basically. It's that each one is malleable in many different ways. It's the idea that there are many, wood comes in many shapes.
Mm.
There are many types of metal. There are
Mm.
waters that do, wave
Right.
versus whirlpools. And, so all of these different aspects of it get kind of in there. And that's what creates the different techniques, right? So I'll just use Bung Chen, for example. I mean, um, the form, is a straight punch, right? But that straight punch can go up and down, right? So it can also, punch to the balls or the nose, right? So it's, or it can make a circle as a block, and so it
Hmm.
has many different ways of being used, but the structure of it is going to be basically the same. The physical structure is
Mm.
going to be the same. I think that's what he's getting to in terms
Hmm.
of the posture versus
Right.
um
Tactic.
tactic.
And also there's that footwork element. Like there's the half step bung chun, but there's also like a lightning step bung chun where you take a full step with each punch.
Hmm. Well, there's
Or
basically five different kinds of steps that you can apply to all of
many
the
more.
elements. So you flying steps, half steps, full steps, sideways steps, diagonal steps.
Right.
Basically it's the same thing as you have in Tai Chi, right? You got the they in Tai Chi, the five element part of Tai Chi is the directions, right? The the
Hmm.
the moving your feet in front
Right, right.
and moving
Earth
your
is the
body.
middle where you don't move. It's
Right.
its own
And
game.
and that's kind of where it's not exactly the same, but there are a lot of sort of parallels in
Sure
terms
are.
of uses of the five elements. For the
Yeah,
most obvious being that you can see with the punch in Tai Chi, it's the exact same technique as Wing Chun.
pretty much.
I mean, it's done slightly differently because it's Tai Chi, but I mean, as far as the movement of the arms and everything, the shoulders, and it's as
And
close.
where it ends with a vertical
Yeah.
punch,
And just, the
reverse
flavor
punch,
of it and what it does, it's like it's basically the same thing. And
looking pretty similar.
or not brush. Yeah, brush knee and twist step is basically Pichun just
Cross peach end
on
kind
the
of.
front leg instead of on the back leg.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and this is something common to Chinese martial arts is like these the postures you learn, then you adapt them and change them and use them. You apply them to sword work and spear work. You apply them to single opponent, multiple opponent. They're meant to be super, especially internal martial arts. They're meant to be super changeable and usable and malleable and adaptable. Whereas I think boxing as a fight sport, like the rules are very specific. You set your feet a certain way each time you use this. They're not meant to be used for weapon work, for instance, or for anywhere, street self-defense. I'm sure it's fine too, but like they don't have that cosmological connection that martial arts do, Asian martial arts do. That's one of the things that makes Asian martial arts cool. You've got these cosmological concepts mixed in with the training that you do, and some people don't like it, but I think it's cool. It just gives, I don't know, it helps me open my mind and be more flexible and
I mean, I think the idea really is that it's similar to Japanese martial arts tend to do it this way as well, where it's if they do this attack, I have this tactic. I step to the right and I do my jab, or I step to the left and I hook, or whatever, right? So you're sort of set with, okay, they've got the same five punches I do, and so you're learning, okay, well, if they do this one, I do this one, right?
if I do
Yeah,
it faster and harder, I'm gonna win.
yeah, and if I have better timing and all these sorts, there are a lot of reasons, but that's basically the setup, right? Same thing with Japanese martial arts. It's generally like, you know, this punch, if they do that, you block like this. If they punch this, you do this. Because again, you're sort of going off the idea that the other guy is using pretty much the same tactics that you're using, or something at least you're familiar with, right? Internal martial arts kind of throw that out the window at some point and just go off of feeling, right? That you're able to, it's not like close your eyes and, Yoda type shit, but it's, you're able to feel what the person's body is doing at touch, and you just adapt to that rather than having this like, I'm going to do this when they do that. So you don't have to think about it in the same way, because you don't have to analyze what they're doing. You could just feel, okay, there's something coming towards me. I don't want to be here. You move your body in the way that it doesn't, puts you on a better angle. And, they're, Bob, as they say, Bob's your uncle. It's like things get a lot easier when you do it that way, rather than just, bashing into their force. It's that take an angle and then apply your technique. So you're not, you don't have to be bigger and stronger to win.
But it helps.
It always helps, but
Every podcast we mention that it does help.
But it's the idea that, again, like I said, it's, you're not training on the presumption that the other person is going to be doing anything in particular, right? Like that's really the difference. Is like most martial arts, it's like how good you are is basically how many techniques you can remember, right? Like you go, okay, well, if I'm in this position, I throw in this technique. If I'm in that position, I throw in that technique. And eventually you do that enough, it becomes natural. You don't have to think about it. And that's, that's the goal of all martial arts. But the internal martial arts kind of start with the idea of, the goal is not to do it through memorization and reflex. It's to do it through feeling and change and adaptation, right? So it's like, that's sort of where the one of the reasons they use this 5 element thing is because it mimics the way things change in nature. Same reason they use the 8 trigrams in Bagua, right? It's like, where Xingyi is, your mind has to be able to just take one, thing and focus on it and be very still with it, and not want to move around and, have all this busyness. It's, just to be able to be still, and then within that stillness be able to find change. And that's not easy to do. And that's why Xingyi, I think, is vastly underrated in terms of its depth, right? Because most of the time it's just done as a fighting thing, which it's phenomenal at, just as a basic, like punching, kicking, fighting type of thing. It's really good at that. But it has this other level where, if you choose to go down that road, it can take you to this thing of like using your mind in a way that most people aren't really acutely aware of.
Absolutely. There's depth there. So he carries on with talking about 5 element theory. As with many ideas from Chinese antiquity, there's been controversy over the 5 elements theory. A quote from the late Han Dynasty Wen Zi text serves as an apt caveat for any boxer who fails to adjust boxing strategy to the realities of a fight. Metal may overcome wood, but with one axe, a man cannot cut down a whole forest. Earth may overcome water, but with a single handful, one cannot dam up a river. Water may overcome fire, but with no more than a cup of it, one cannot put out a large conflagration. So that speaks to what we were just saying. Like this all depends. Like if you have a ton of water, sure, you can wipe out fire, but if you only have a little cup, you can't put out a forest fire. So just keep that caveat in mind.
Well,
It
I
isn't
mean,
always going to work the way the
that's
chart shows.
that's the internal versus external power debate summed up in a nutshell, which is, if your internal power isn't stronger than their external power, you lose.
Right? Forget about it.
It's like it isn't this thing that just because you have a little bit of internal whatever, that you're going to defeat every external person, or vice
Right.
versa, right? Like there is this piece about, you have to, like, train essentially, but
Right.
that you have to like look at it in terms of what am I actually capable of? And the forest example is great, right? Because it addresses the idea of, just because you got that axe in your hand and you feel strong and you feel like, oh, I could take on anything. You ever actually try to cut down a tree with an axe? It's fucking
Slow going.
hard work. That's why we invented chainsaws, you know?
Right.
It's like,
He says, when performed, five elements movements appear to be linear. However, with continual practice, the students become aware of the circles, the coiled springs, and the arm and the band springs that are to be found in the movement of the waist, the legs, and the arms. It is then that the Xingyi practitioner can discover the energy characteristics of the five elements within one's own body. So he goes on to say, Xingyi training will transform the body. Doing the classical five elements form, one practices initiating energy from both the right and left sides of the body. Xingyi drills are designed to change the old body, to overcome habitual tendencies and imbalances, and to restore the symmetry and balance of the body to its original form.
right. Well, this is the Negong part of it, right? That it's not just about doing the boom, boom, bang, bang, that there's this growth and development and all this other stuff that you're like, that's happening sometimes even without your knowledge. I think
I like
that's
how he says it fixes imbalances because by you doing a very strict form practice on each side, if your right side is weaker than your left side, if you do it enough, they're going to even each other out kind of like you're going
sure.
to follow the same rules on your left as your right. So if you have a habitual tendency to like shift your weight on your right side, if you do this enough, that's going to get burned out of you because you're going to be spending tons of time on your left. So by the time you're done, similar to Tai Chi, you get used to fully shifting onto each side. That really helps balance the
But
two
see,
sides of your body.
with Tai Chi, to fully do that, you actually have to do the form on both sides. Because Tai Chi will balance you out just as much as Xingyi will, but it does it in a different way.
Definitely. The goal is the same on that level. It's a different process. He says that after months of practicing the five elements and the other Xingyi forms, every joint in my body seemed to be affected. At different times, my shoulders and legs ached. Then my hips and my ankles were sore. Hong said that this was a good sign and that the stiffness in the joints would go away with more practice, that the benefits of Xingyi take time, and that the feeling of soreness would be replaced by a feeling of strength and flexibility. So there's some inspiration if you're feeling tired and burned out from learning it, that hey, that's the feeling of strength and flexibility being created.
Yeah, I mean, the best example of this, and again, this was kind of Hung's method of doing at least Peachman, where you hold each of the postures within the movement, right?
So each step of the movement you hold for no numerous breaths.
Yeah. Or even, three breaths or something like that. But
Right.
what that's doing is that in each posture, it's giving you this sort of chance to go inside and let
Mm,
things reconnect and, refocus and all this stuff where you're not
really slow it down.
getting ahead of yourself.
Right, because rushing through it, you might take some shortcuts. So if you've got to stand there and hold the posture as you shift forward, then hold it as you bring the other foot up to it, then hold it as you bring that foot forward, then hold it as you shift forward. That's going to force you to really make sure all your alignments are right and your body's really balanced and that you're not clenching or getting stuck or you're just going to have to work your way through that and find all the places where you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Like he says, things are changing in your body as you do these postures. It's not just about, um, it's not just the fighting technique. It's about
Mm.
each one of these things is activating different parts of your body. It's opening different things up. And one of the like indicators that something is being activated is it starts to hurt, right? So, I mean, if you hold Santi for 20 minutes and your shoulders start to burn, at least you know something's happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, standing there with twisting the hell out of yourself at the same time, it affects the physical tissues of your body over time as you work on it and it becomes stronger and more flexible for
Yeah,
sure.
and I mean, it's just one of those things I think most people don't, until you try it, they have no idea how difficult just to hold your arm up in
Yes.
for 20 minutes, right?
Yes.
And that when you start doing that, the real art of it is using enough effort that you're engaging all of these things, but not so much that you stop it from happening, right? And
Mhm.
the best example is with twisting, right? You twist two-thirds of the way, and you get this really strong connection from your arm to your shoulder to your back. But if you twist 100% of the way, you actually put yourself in a worse position, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of what you're doing in the forms is learning how to calibrate these sorts of things. How much twist do you need to make sure that your elbow stays in the position, your knee stays in the
Right.
position, right?
And
And
too
that's
little, you might not be getting as much as you could out of the practice because you're avoiding kind of the pain and discomfort.
right. Well, too little and you don't get it and you just don't get the power and you
It's
just
just
kind
going
of
to slow your progress
just
down. And
floppy. It's like it doesn't, I mean, it's not, it will still make you healthy. It's still good exercise, but it doesn't really give you the ability to use it as a effective martial art because it's not making you strong. And the whole thing of like the standing aspects of internal martial arts, whether it's holding your arms up in the air while you walk the circle or holding postures in Xingyi and Tai Chi, that is where the real internal change
mm,
happens, not in the movements. The movements are kind of where you stir things up and stretch things
yeah.
out and get things moving. But the part where you're standing and holding a posture, that's when things internally start to kind of integrate and um, connect, in a cohesive way, and that's again what why the internal martial arts have that, and again, not many other martial arts have that, which is why you can use the internal martial arts the way you can.
So Bob finishes up by saying, "Many years have passed since I learned with Hong. At the end of my stay, he said to me that I had trained hard, that I needed more time to absorb all that he had shown me, and more time to digest all that he had taught me. Hong said that the practice of the five elements form is the key to understanding Xingyi's gift. It is with the enduring practice of the five elements form that these ancient lessons are passed on." And
Yeah,
that's a nice coda to the story, like you said, like that, and that in blurred boundaries that we've been talking about on the Patreon, that's the recurring lesson. You need time. You need time to absorb. You need time to digest. You can't rush through Xingyi, especially of all things.
yeah,
You've got to just swallow it and take it and get frustrated and get tired and get bored. Like you've got to go through all the process. You just knowing it's not enough. You've got to absorb and digest and just inhale it somehow and hold it in.
yeah, and the idea that the thing you go back to when you want to go deeper is
Mm,
the five elements, right? The
mm.
things like the animal forms and the two-person sets and all that stuff, that's great. And they have their purpose, but when you really want to go deep and start figuring out what's going on, both in your mind and in your body, the five elements is where that stuff happens. And
Yeah, I think all the Xingyi schools would agree that there's a lot of pieces to it, but every time the true ancient lessons, as he puts it, are to be discovered in those simple five element fist forms.
yeah, because it's easy to get distracted by the fun stuff and the exciting stuff and forget that, what you did in the beginning, that was the stuff that's your anchor and that's what you got to go back to. And um it's the idea of like that becomes your religion. That becomes the
Hmm.
thing you go back to when things start going haywire is you got this place where you can find your center,
Hmm.
and in Xingyi, it's a literal thing. It's not just a metaphor for your mind. It's like you get physically centered, and that, again, that mind body connection thing, it just kind of clicks in at some point. It's a very powerful tool.
Indeed. All right, well, let's call it there for now. But first, let us return to the blurred boundaries that we've been continuing our discussion over on the Patreon. Blurred Boundaries by Hong Zihan, the life of Hong Yishiang, as told by his son. Um, And we just got through the big showdown challenge match between Mr. K, otherwise known as BK Francis, versus Hung Han.
AKA Sweet Potato.
And as the dust clears after the big fight, years later, Mr. K returned to Taiwan. In addition to expressing his gratefulness and memories of Master Hung, he vividly recounted his various deeds on the mainland of China, about seeking skills and his adventures with masters of Baguazhang, who passed down to him their unique hand methods. And yeah, we'll go on from there about Master Hong's response to his adventures in China.
All right.
So I'll see you on the Patreon.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey, folks, if you want to hear the rest of the story of the Sweet Potato Saga, you can head over to the Patreon. It's $5 a month to join for the basic membership. $10 a month gets you the premium membership. So check it out. Thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.